Glory be to the Triune God, respected Achan, and my brothers and sisters in Christ. Today, we are going to explore a passage from the Gospel of St. Matthew, specifically St. Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 to 37, which is part of the Sermon on the Mount, which is the first major discourse of Jesus. This section of the Gospel includes 6 laws where Jesus reinterprets or revises the Old Testament laws. But I have been given 3 laws to reflect. Jesus expands on the commandments related to adultery, divorce, and oaths. He calls for a radical transformation of personal attitudes and ethical behavior, confronts traditional Jewish practices and teachings, urging truthfulness and integrity. These laws were originally given to the Jewish people as commandments, but Jesus brings a deeper understanding to them, focusing on the fulfillment of the law through internal transformation rather than mere external adherence. First point I want to discuss is about destroying the cause. In St. Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 to 30, Jesus addresses the 7th commandment, you shall not commit adultery, which is in the Old Testament law, Exodus chapter 20, verses 14. While the Pharisees focused on the physical act of adultery, Jesus goes deeper, pointing out that lust in the heart is just as sinful. He says, but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. St. Matthew chapter 5, verses 28. Jesus teaches that sin starts in the heart, and our thoughts are just as important as our actions. He uses strong imagery. It's better to cut off hand or pluck out an eye than to let sin take root. St. Matthew chapter 5, verses 29 to 30. This isn't literal. It's about radical self-discipline to prevent sin from growing. It shows seriousness of a sin. As you can see in the slide, I have given cause and effect. So the lust which leads to adultery. So when you destroy the lust, you automatically destroy the adultery or the effect. So writing divorce letter for unfair reasons, which leads to divorce or adultery, and swearing in the name of God, which leads to deceit, and destroying the root cause of sin can eliminate the sin itself. So anger and hatred, which leads to murder, greed and theft, greed, which leads to theft, dishonesty and falsehood, which leads to lying. So destroying the cause automatically destroys the sin. So Lent is a time for purification. We should focus on cleansing, not just our actions, but also our thoughts, striving for purity in both heart and mind. So next I want to share is about the Decalogue or 10 Commandments being reinterpreted by Jesus Christ. So in this section, Jesus reinterprets 2 key commandments from the Decalogue, that is the 10 commandments, specifically addressing adultery and oaths. The first law is about adultery and lust. Verses 27 to 30, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So Old Testament law, which deals with is the 7th commandment in the Decalogue, Exodus chapter 20, verses 14. So the Jews, especially the Pharisees, severely opposed the act of adultery, but Jesus revises the law and condemns the lustful intent. Jesus wants us to forbid the root cause that leads to sin. His focus is our heart's inclination that leads to sin. But by revising the old law, Jesus wants our transformation. Our ways should be pure. Take this Lenten season as a period of purification of our heart or a period of transformation. Jesus makes a call to cut off a hand or pluck out an eye is not literal. This highlights the seriousness of sin, and this is called for self-discipline. A radical discipleship is intended here. Next is the oath. which is given under the Old Testament law, that is, third commandment in the Decalogue, Exodus chapter 20, verses 7. Jesus also addresses the issue of oaths. In the Old Testament, people swore oaths by God or sacred objects to prove trustworthiness. However, Jesus criticizes the Jewish practice of swearing to validate their sincerity, as seen in St. Matthew chapter 5, verses 33 to 37. He teaches, do not swear at all. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than that, this comes from the evil one. Jesus calls for integrity in speech, teaching that we should be truthful without the need for oaths. If we are honest in our words, we should not need external assurances to prove our trustworthiness. Lent is a time of renewal, justice, and integrity. Jesus' interpretation of the Decalogue challenges us to be faithful in a relationship, protects the vulnerable, and live with honesty and integrity in all our actions and words. And lastly, the revision of divorce law by Jesus. So, in the Old Testament, Deuteronomy chapter 24, 1 to 4 permits a man to divorce his wife if he finds something objectionable about her. So, what is something objectionable about her? The interpretation of what constitutes objectionable became a subject of debate between two Jewish rabbinic schools. The first one is the Shammai school. Shammai school interpreted objectionable strictly as adultery. The Hillel school interpreted it more loosely, allowing divorce for any reason the husband found displeasing, such as dislikes about her cooking or appearance. This difference in interpretation also highlights the issue of double morality, holding men and women to different standards. Men were often allowed to initiate divorce for trivial reasons, while women had little to no recourse in such situations. Jesus responds by restricting divorce to cases of sexual immorality. In St. Matthew chapter 5, verses 32 says, but I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, causes her to commit adultery. This teaching protects women from unjust abandonment, as women at that time faced significant social and economic consequences if divorced. They often faced poverty, social stigma, and legal disadvantages. Jesus stands for women's right, protecting them from the harmful effects of divorce laws that were prone to exploitation and abuse. He calls for faithfulness in marriage, emphasizing the sanctity of the marital relationship. So, I want to conclude my words by summarizing three main points. Destroying the root cause removes the sin itself. True righteousness comes from inner transformation, not just external obedience. The Lenten season calls for transformation and a renewed commitment to truth, integrity, love, and faithfulness. The first century Jews were legalistic and they were important and they gave importance to external obedience to the law. Their focus was on outward behavior rather than inward transformation. So Jesus criticizes their legalistic obedience and invites them to internal righteousness. Jesus challenges their actions as well as their attitudes. Lent calls for our outward change and transformation. We are invited to keep purity, love, and integrity, and thus keep holiness in our daily life. May the God bless us all. Thank you.